Ken Martin, welcome to Pod Save America.
Thank you, John. What is my second time, right?
This is your second time, first time in person.
That's great.
We love that. So it's been 6 months. Have you fixed the party yet?
Working on it for sure. And we've been hard at work in these 6 months. Lots of great programs we've started, initiatives that we're doing. Fundraising is going great. There's lots of stuff that's happening, of course. It's going to take some time, right, for sure. As you know, we sort of hit a low water mark in the Democratic Party, not as a result of this last election, as we talked about the last time. You know, I didn't run for this because we lost the last election, but we've been losing ground for some time with so many parts of our coalition, which really culminated in that loss last year. And for me, it's really trying to fix things that are going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. Of course, we have to win in 25 and 26, which we will, and that's where our focus is. But we have to build in a way that acknowledges that a lot of the ground we lost throughout the country, both geographic ground and red communities that used to be blue, and with communities that used to support us that are no longer supporting us in the same numbers. It's going to take time to get those places back and those folks back.
What have you learned over the last 6 months on the job about what it will take to improve people's image of the party and persuade voters that Democrats are the party that fights for working people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, as we talked about the last time, we really have to examine where we are actually communicating, how we're communicating, and to who. And we've really missed the boat there. And I think one of the things is we look at paths forward and who's been successful. You look at Mamdani in New York and what he did there, right? I think it's both authenticity matters. Clearly, authenticity matters. You can't get up and say one thing and do another, and that's part of the challenge for the Democratic Party, as we've talked about before, is people just don't believe that we're standing up and fighting for them. So authenticity, people thirst for that in politics, but that's not enough alone, right? It's also just being ubiquitous in where you campaign, and that's the other lesson from Mamdani's campaign, is really how you campaign and where you're campaigning really matters. So he was ubiquitous in terms of in person. He was everywhere, and he was speaking to everyone, right? Not targeting specific people, but just talking to everyone on the street, talking to everyone at their doors, really, getting out of that old sort of, tactic of just talking to these doors or this group of people, but really taking his message to every person he could. The other piece was the online spaces, right? Really just, I saw podcasts of him with, podcasts that are, sort of low budget, affairs that maybe had 100 followers, but he was on there, right? He was going on every single podcast and then doing his own sort of social media on top of that. So how you campaign matters. But I would say most importantly, what he campaigned on. He campaigned for something. Think about that. He had a very positive message about how he was actually going to make things more affordable for people, how he's going to actually make it easier for people to live in New York City. And so I think as we move forward, what we have to do as a Democratic Party is we have to focus on a message that gives people a sense that we're fighting for them. And that can't be, by the way, just resistance. And while we have to resist Donald Trump with everything we have, it's not an either or. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We absolutely have to give people a sense of who we are. When Ken Martin or you or anyone gets up and laments Donald Trump, of course we're going to say that. We're Democrats. But what would they expect except for us to do that? But what is left wanting from most people is then, what are you going to do? How are you going to make a difference? So for us to get working people back, again, I think we got to focus on a message around affordability, right? How can people afford childcare? How can they afford their groceries? How can they afford their rent? How can they afford their car payment? Can they afford to maybe squirrel away a few nickels to afford a vacation and actually enjoy life, right? So affordability is such a big piece of it. That's what we got to focus on right now. We also have to focus on healthcare access. We know for the first time in American history now, thanks to this bullshit bill that they just passed, that 17 million Americans are going to lose healthcare right off the bat. But as importantly, with the closing of 300 hospitals and a quarter of nursing homes in this country, people are going to lose access to health care all over this country. And we have to fight back against that right now, and we actually have to fight for something. When we get into office, we actually need to reverse the very serious damages that this bill is going to do and actually push for greater health care access. And the third thing I think we really need to focus in on, right, to get working class people back, is talking about the corrupt system that we have in politics right now, a system that is rigged against hardworking Americans, all to favor billionaires. We really have to drill into this. It's corrupt at its core, and you can see that every single day of this administration, what Donald Trump's doing to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people in our communities at the expense of hardworking Americans who just want a shot to get ahead. And I think I've said this before too. My old boss, Paul Wellstone, his slogan was, "We all do better when we all do better." And I believe that should be the slogan of the Democratic Party. Because when we mean all, we mean all. And that's how we get working people back, not just in words, but in action, and making sure that we are having conversations with everyone, everywhere.
So let's talk about this in the context of the midterms. 1994, Newt Gingrich does Contract with America in advance of the midterms. More recently, I think in 2006, when Democrats did quite well, sort of had an anti-corruption agenda.
That's right.
You and I have been in politics long enough now to know that there's some advice that, maybe Democrats shouldn't have a specific plan or agenda ahead of the midterms because it'll give the Republicans something to attack, and we want the focus to be on how badly the Republicans have governed the country over the last 2 years. But what do you think? Do you think we should have an actual policy agenda as a party that voters can latch onto? Because you mentioned Mamdani, but one of the things that I think really attracted people to his candidacy was people could remember what some of his big policy proposals were, whether or not you agreed with them.
Yeah, I think we should, to be honest with you. I think people want a sense of what you're actually going to do. And it can't just be platitudes. I think the more detail we can give to the American people, the better. Certainly you mentioned Newt Gingrich in 94. I remember I was working on a congressional campaign that year when we lost. And what was remarkable about that year is not that they took back the House majority. They defeated a 40-year House majority that Democrats held. We don't see majorities like that anymore. But the reality is that it was quite historic, and there's a lesson to be learned there. There's a lesson to be learned in other years when we've won. And there's no doubt that Donald Trump's numbers, where the Republicans are sitting right now, certainly helps us going into a midterm. But we need to win in a way that helps rebuild our coalition and helps us not just win one election cycle, but actually wins the future and wins and builds a permanent majority, right? I'm not interested in just winning the House back and then losing it again in 28, right? And part of that is actually running on a tangible agenda that people can see and they know what they're voting for. And that I think, again, you mentioned Mamdani. There's plenty of people who are running on very, specific policy agenda, giving people specifics about what they would do if they were elected. And that's what I think our party and our leadership needs to do.
From your standpoint as DNC chairman, when you think about, a message and a platform that sort of goes after some of the Trump Republican corruption that we've seen these last couple of years, have you thought about ways to, show that the Democratic Party is, regains trust with people, that people think that, Democrats are honest brokers and, there's no secret backroom dealing. And just because, obviously trust in institutions everywhere is at an all-time low, that includes the Democratic Party. What sort of reforms or changes have you had in mind for the party, with what you can control, that would help people, build trust in the party again?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I famously know now, I brought the superdelegate reform forward in 2017 because I saw in 2016, whether real or perceived, there were supporters of a presidential candidate that year who felt like party bosses were putting their thumb on the scale, of course, and that the establishment was pushing them and their candidate out of the process. If we want to actually attract people back into the party, we have to make sure that our party is not, in fact, putting its thumb on the scale. And so that neutrality pledge was really important for me then, and it continues to be now. And so I'm bringing a whole slew of reforms forward to actually help democratize the DNC itself. But as it relates to the Democratic Party, I also will be looking at a way for us to, in our presidential primary process, actually figure out how we can ban dark money in our presidential nominating process, right? The corrosive impact of money in politics right now, we have to find a way to reverse course. And part of that is there stuff that we can do within the party process itself to start living our values, right? Clearly the only people who can actually regulate this will be Congress, and they've refused to really take this issue up in a meaningful way. But the party can do something about this within our own process. And so, again, writ large, outside of the internal party processes, we got to fight for reform. We've got to fight to get big money out of politics. We've got to fight to, raise the minimum wage and, fight for Medicare for all and to make sure that we have healthcare access for people in this country. We got to fight for policies that are actually going to substantially improve communities and help people get ahead in life. And so it can't just be platitudes. It's got to be very specific pieces. On the reform side of this, look, at the core of it, right, when we fight for policies that help working class individuals and help the majority of Americans, that in of itself is reform in the sense that we are giving people a sense of, the fact that all the deck is tilted right now towards billionaires in this country. And I would say the Republicans have done their part to show whose side they're on. We as Democrats need to show whose side we're on. And we can't be on the side of, rich billionaires. We got to be on the side of hardworking Americans who just want a shot. And so there's a lot of different reforms you can push for sure to show that. I'm happy to be a part of those within the DNC itself. I the first Democratic chair to actually give up power to allow for direct elections onto our various committees. People thought I was crazy when I did that. But I believe in democratizing our party itself. If we expect members of Congress and expect other elected officials to follow suit, well, it starts right here within the DNC, and we're doing our part to actually open it up to new voices, to make sure that people, regardless of what side of the ideological spectrum they live on within our party, that their voices are welcome and wanted, to make sure that our party supports whoever the Democratic primary voters support and not who the establishment wants, right? So I'm doing my part to actually reform our party. And I expect and hope that other members of our party will follow suit, and they are.
Does it concern you at all that some Democratic Party leaders have not yet endorsed Mamdani, since, as you mentioned, he is the choice of the Democratic primary voters and the Democratic Party's candidate now for he's the nominee?
Yeah,
and it's just kind of taken them a while to come around.
Yeah, I can't. I don't want to. Get in between the decisions that people have to make and how they come to those conclusions. But what I do know is our party has to make sure that we are always following the will of the voters, right, and Democratic primary voters. And whoever they nominate, they nominate a conservative Democrat, right, or a leftist or a centrist or a progressive. I believe our party has to support them. I've been very consistent on that. And, I would hope that others would follow suit, as I said, but that's not up to me. They all can, I suppose, do whatever the heck they want. But we have to lead by example here. And for me, and that's making sure that we're honoring the will of primary voters throughout this country. There's parts of this country where they're going to nominate very conservative Democrats who, frankly, I probably will have, a deep disagreement on. But it's not up to me to decide, what, and there's no one way or stripe of being a Democrat. I mean, I think that's what is unique about the Democratic Party, makes us different than the Republicans. We're not homogenous as it relates to ideology. We don't beat people out of the party or drum them out because of dissent or debate. We don't expect them to march lockstep with us on every single issue. There's great divergence of ideology, and we have to celebrate that. And yes, that makes for messy debate. Yes, that makes for sometimes tense conversations within our party. But that's, in my opinion, a healthy part of our party, and that's what separates us from the Republicans. So I want to make sure that we continue to march in that path, to continue to open ourselves up to new voices and to new perspectives. And frankly, that's the only thing that's ever changed this party in the past. I think I mentioned this to you before about the 1948 convention in Philadelphia. Yeah, I'm not going to repeat that story, but it is truly, it's new voices, and it's young voices, it's new perspectives that help to push our party on so many critical issues. We've never evolved on issues without new voices pushing us to do so. So we shouldn't be afraid of bringing new voices in. We shouldn't be afraid of change. We should welcome that, and we should continue to foster that, and that's what I'm going to do as chair. And yeah, there's people in the party who don't like that. A lot of the status quo folks and the establishment Dems and the people who are vested in keeping things the same way they've always been. Well, I'm not one of them. I did not come here to ask for permission. I was elected decisively, John, on the first ballot, as you know. And I did not come here to keep things the same. I came here to shake things up and to do things that help us win. And that's my number one focus, is winning elections.
Well, one thing that could really shake things up, my co-host Dan Pfeiffer just wrote a piece about this today. The incredibly annoying flood of fundraising texts, many of them from scam packs that don't even give the money to Democratic campaigns, let alone Democratic campaigns that are competitive. What can the DNC do about this, if anything?
Well, it's a serious challenge, and it's one of the things that, frankly, is really frustrating to me because you see, to your point, there's so many texts and emails going out. One of the platforms, we're in conversation right now with one of the platforms about how do you just regulate the volume of fundraising appeals that are going out, because that in of itself is making digital fundraising much more difficult for people to actually break through and break into. But beyond that, there are so many scam packs, to your point. Within an hour of me being elected as a DNC chair, someone took my mug, my face, put it on an email saying, I'm Ken Martin, the newly elected chair of the DNC, give us money.
Which is always what you do when you text someone. You just send a picture of your face. That's how you know it's real. Yeah.
Exactly. But here's the deal, right? At the end of the day, most people don't know it's fake. They don't go down and look at the disclaimer. So they're thinking they're giving $5, $10, $15 to the Democratic Party, right? That email and text alone probably pilfered, a couple $100,000, maybe more, away from the Democratic Party. And that's true of candidates. We're taking money into these scam packs who are raising money under the guise of the Democratic Party. It's probably hundreds of millions of dollars that's going into the pockets of these scam artists. So we have to crack down on that. What can the DNC do about it? Well, we're in conversations with those platforms, all those various fundraising platforms, to really ask them to up their game in terms of vetting the people who are using those platforms, making sure that we're regulated in the number of emails that are going out, and at the end of the day, doing our part to cut down on this fraud. I mean, this is a scam, and a lot of people are falling for it, unfortunately.
Let's talk money. Latest filings showed the DNC with $15 million on hand, RNC with more than $80 million on hand. I know you raised a record amount in your first quarter as chair, but what is your level of concern about the disparity?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not concerned about our fundraising right now, for sure. I mean, look, we've raised in my first 5 months more money than any other DNC chair in the history of the party. And what's fueling that is grassroots donations. And that's the wonderful thing about it is, as you know, John, if you're building a fundraising pyramid, on the base of it, you want those small dollar contributions, those $5, $15, $20, $25 a month contributions that come in on a monthly basis, right? And what you don't want is the inverse pyramid where you're relying on high net worth donors who are very fickle, right? They might get pissed off about this and they decide not to give, or they still have a hangover from the last election and they're going to wait for, I don't know what the hell they're waiting for, but they're going to wait to give. The reality is the way we're building it is much more sustainable. And so we have the resources to compete. We've already made record investments in our state parties. We're making investments in New Jersey and Virginia, significant 7-figure investments in those states, as well as in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court races. We're doing our part to build infrastructure throughout the country. So the fact that we're lagging behind the Republicans has not prevented us from doing the work we need to build towards the future. Do we need to raise more money? Absolutely. But I will tell you at this point in 2017, which is probably the analogous year, right? Tom Perez comes in on the heels of a very, tough election loss when we lost to Trump the first time. Same sort of dynamic. Morale was low. Donors were pissed off. People, didn't know what the hell the Democratic Party was doing, right? People wanted to see more fight from the Democratic Party. All the same, recipe that was there is here now as well, which is unfortunate, but it's what I have to deal with. I have to get out there and talk to donors and give them a sense of our plan and how we're going to win again. We also have to have an accounting for what happened in the last election, which is why we're finishing our after-action review to really dig into this, to give people a sense who invested so much time, energy, and money what happened and why we lost. And I have
what's the status of that so far? What can you tell us about what you've learned so far?
Yeah, it's almost done. But let me finish on the donor stuff, and let's come back to it. I don't begrudge the fact that donors are pissed off. I'd be concerned if they weren't pissed off, to be honest with you. I mean, the reality is every conversation I've had with donors, they're not saying no. They're just saying not yet. And I think the conversations we're having as I lay out my plan and vision, people see what I'm trying to do and where we're going. And we are actually running ahead of where Tom Perez was at this point with large donors given to the party. So again, for me, it's just making sure that we continue to grind, get out there, talk to people, introduce myself, introduce the plan and vision, and give people a sense of what we're doing to actually put ourselves in a position to win again. On the after-action review, and this is important, I think as you know better than anyone, there was $10 billion spent in the ecosystem last year. And the previous after-action reviews, and I don't call it a post-mortem because we're not dead yet, right? But we might be on life support, but we're still kicking. So I will say this. The previous after-action reports really focused just on what the party and the campaign spent. And that ignores, which was about $2.5 billion, right? $10 billion spent in the ecosystem on the Democratic side alone, meaning that the $2.5 billion that was spent is a quarter of all of the activity and spending. So if I just look at the quarter of the activity, I'm missing the rest of it. So what we're looking at is the campaign, the party, of course. We're looking at the tactics, the spending, the messaging, the timing, all of it. But we're also looking at all the other spending that was happening in the ecosystem as well. The $7.5 billion that was spent on top of that by various groups on the outside, other organizations, right? To really holistically look at where we did well and where we fell down on the job. And we have to do it because when you win elections, you're a genius. You did nothing wrong. And as a result, think about this, in 2020, they didn't do a post-election review. Right. Well, we won.
Yeah.
Everything was great. Right? I mean, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
In 2024, we have to do this, and we have to look at it very holistically, and that's what we're doing. So, what I'm not interested in is answering questions that don't help inform future elections.
Some party officials talked to the New York Times for this story. I'm sure you read it. There seems to be this sort of proxy battle going on between the DNC Democratic groups and Future Forward, which is the big super PAC that helped out in 2024 and past elections before that. What have you learned so far about sort of the efficacy of outside groups, of the Biden campaign, and then the Harris campaign, the DNC? Like, what are some sort of top lines that you now that you feel comfortable sharing?
What I would say is, first off, we're very thankful and grateful for all the organizations that lean in, and not just groups like Future Forward, but other organizations that are out there spending money, raising money to be helpful, right? And so I want to be clear, and they've been very forthcoming in conversations that we've had with them for this report. So. But let me say, there are no sacred cows. What we're looking at right now is everything. And the biggest takeaway we have writ large for everyone, from hard side committees to soft side committees to other spenders in this ecosystem that spent $10 billion, is we waited way too late. All of us. Campaign, party, outside groups, others. We really didn't start making investments and running program until the spring of 24, and in many cases much later. Why does that matter? Because the Republicans, one thing we see on their side is they run a permanent campaign.
Yeah.
They never went down. They lost in 20, and they just ran a perpetual campaign all the way through 24. By the time we had already started our activity in the spring of 24, they had already defined us. They had already beaten us to the punch before we ever had a chance to define ourselves. One of the biggest lessons is we cannot wait anymore. We have to break this sort of antiquated idea that campaigns only start 5 months before an election, and that's when we're going to flood the zone. Donald Trump's campaigning right now. The Republicans literally are running ads around their agenda right now and what they're doing in Washington, nonstop. We can't afford to wait. And yes, that means, unfortunately, for those of us who already think campaigns and elections are too long, that we're going to have to elongate it out. Yes, it's going to require more money. Yes, it means we're going to see more ads by both parties in years, a year, 2 years in advance of an election. And yes, it's going to piss people off. But the reality is we cannot afford to tie one of our hands behind our back because we're good government folks. The idea that once a campaign's over, you put the campaign swords down and you start to govern. And then you don't come back to campaigning until 2 years later or 4 years later. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so what you'll see writ large, the biggest takeaway, and it's true of every group, the campaign, the party, no exception, is everyone started way too late.
One thing that I'm been very interested in, and I'm sure you guys are taking a look at this, is just the efficacy of traditional organizing activities. So door knocking, phone banking, text messages, whatever it may be. Obviously, the Trump campaign and Elon Musk, they had their thing, but they relied heavily on just sort of, not just like digital paid, but just the digital ecosphere,
right.
And didn't do a lot of door knocking. Do you think that, what have you learned about sort of campaign tactics in the after action review and going forward in terms of like the best way to organize and the best way to get people to pay attention?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And some of that will be reflected in the report. But we already know this, and we've been talking about it quite a bit in terms of where we missed the mark. The Republicans didn't approach those digital spaces just through a communications lens. The communications lens, of course, is come on to podcasts like Pod Save America because they have a huge number of followers, and you want to get your candidate and your message in front of as many listeners or viewers as possible. Great. That's one way in which people have approached these digital spaces, and it's an important way. But the piece that the Republicans really figured out is how do you organize in those digital spaces? And that's where they came in with this very sophisticated micro and nano influencer strategy starting very early on. As we've mentioned before, finding the PTA mom in a community with 500 to 1,000 followers, right? And putting her on the payroll to beat the shit out of Joe Biden and the Democratic Party or to talk about Donald Trump, right? Finding a college basketball player on a small college campus to do the same thing. You multiply that by hundreds of thousands of people, right? And now you have this messaging apparatus that's really an organizing apparatus. When I was an organizer, and it wasn't that long ago when I was running campaigns, you would go into a community. You would ask people, who is the thought leader, the opinion leader in that community, whose endorsement is going to move votes? You would then go and get that person on your side, right? Because that endorsement was going to move, this group's votes or this neighborhood's votes, right? And it was block by block, neighbor by neighbor. You'd find those thought leaders, right? This is what Trump and the Republicans did a much more sophisticated job on than we did. When we came into these digital spaces, right? First off, 45% of Americans say they avoid news and politics at all costs, right? Where did we go? News and politics. Where did Trump and the Republicans go on a macro level? They went to sports, entertainment, and culture. We already lost that piece of it, and we have to do a better job on that. But on the micro and nano influencer strategy, we really didn't start doing that in any real way until way late, and we didn't approach it through organizing. We approached it through communications. We have to...
One way versus two way. Conversation with people.
Well, that's right, but also just understanding that this is an organizing effort. You don't need to find someone with 1 million followers. Find someone with 1,000 followers, but those 1,000 followers are so rabid in their following that they're going to listen to it. Create brand ambassadors, that their endorsement is going to move votes. It's just how you approach this, right? And we approached it all through the lens of communications. Even when we went to micro nano influencers, it was always about communications instead of organizing.
That makes sense. Obviously, we are not going to run Joe Biden again. And ideally, we're not going to have a situation where the nominee steps down in the middle of the race. But there's obviously a segment of voters, Democrats, independents, who feel fairly or unfairly that, upset with the party for supporting Biden's decision to run, and including after the disastrous debate performance with Trump. How are you thinking about handling that in the after action report? And what would you just say to those voters in general? The Times story said, the headline was like, oh, it's not going to look at the campaign or Biden at all. I don't know if that's true or not, but maybe you could speak to it.
Part of that's true. I'm not going to spend any time trying to answer the question of Biden. I don't know if you have one, but I don't. I don't have a time machine. Can't go back and change it. And what I'm interested in, things that help inform the future, right? And trying to answer that question doesn't help us win elections. Doesn't prevent something from happening down the road. It doesn't change anything. And while it might satiate some people, it doesn't help us win the future. And what I do think it is where that's being driven by is by a bunch of consultants. This is the lazy, easy way to avoid any accountability. Instead of focusing on the things that we actually need to talk about, they'd rather focus on this question of whether or not Joe Biden should have dropped out or not. That's just not worth our time. However, it is. What the New York Times article got wrong is any insinuation that we're not looking at the campaign and tactics and spending and decisions that were made is absolutely false. We're looking at all of that. Campaign, party, outside groups, $10 billion spent within the ecosystem, and we have to be as introspective as possible. There are, and not in a way, by the way, John, that it's a circular firing squad where we're looking to blame people, right? But really looking to draw the right conclusions here. And what did we do well? Again, every election there's things you do well, and there's things you didn't do well. So that is the focus of this. And again, I know people want the Democratic Party to answer that question. We could spend all day, all week, all month trying to answer this question and never come to a conclusion that's going to satiate people here, right? Only to say that it's something I can't change and something likely in the future we're not going to ever have to deal with again. So why spend time on that?
Yeah.
I have an election bearing down on me in just a few months in New Jersey and Virginia. We have big elections in 26. What I'm interested in from this report is things that can help us actually not repeat the mistakes we made this last cycle and for years before that can help us win those elections.
Yeah, the way this question comes to me from people is, well, why didn't the party allow for an open primary, and why did they all just, Kamala Harris just took over and that was that? And I have to explain, well, people could have run and they chose not to run, and so it's the candidates, and the party doesn't actually do that, right? That's not a DNC thing. One place where you're going to have to deal with this in the future, I think, is in a different way, is just this 28 primary calendar.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you talk about like what the process is going to be like of figuring out which states go first? Obviously, the calendar was shaken up for the first time in a while in 24. How does that process work?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll get into the technical side of this process. We started, obviously, I made my appointments to our various committees, the Rules and Bylaws Committee. Their first meeting actually will be at our August DNC meeting in Minneapolis. And at that point, one of the first agenda items will be the discussion of our calendar, because it will take some time to work through this. Over the course of this fall, the committee will come up with sort of guiding principles on what we'll be looking for from the states that want to actually be a part of our early primary window, the early states. And then from there, we will have a process that will be opened up to all states who want to bid for it. I thought the process that was put forward the last time was the right process, even if the result was made by one person. Of course, the reality was the process of allowing states to actually put their best foot forward and make a case on why they should be included in that early state calendar was right. And I hope that we continue with that process. But we have to have some guiding principles on this. And for me, it really comes down to making sure that, one, the process itself is fair and open to any state that wants to be heard and present their case. But second, as it relates to the calendar we put forward, that it's rigorous, efficient, and fair. What do I mean by that? It's rigorous in the sense that at battlegrounds battle tests our eventual nominee, right, in a way that helps make them stronger for the general election. You know, your old boss famously said this about the Iowa caucuses, right, that helped make him a better candidate. It helped him, develop those sort of retail politics skills that didn't make him who he was, but sharpened who he was in advance of that election. There's no doubt we want it to be rigorous in a way that actually helps our candidates be better and be prepared for the upcoming election. The efficient part is important too. We can't have states in the early primary window that are going to be so expensive that we basically bankrupt our candidates before the general election, right? Yeah. You don't want to front load this in a way that actually also prices people out of being able to compete. So the efficient part is really important, because we can't, while we're engaged in this early primary process and our presidential nominating contest, we cannot take our eye off of the one prize that matters: November.
Right.
So we want to do no harm in this process, all right? We want to make sure at the end of the day that this is the early states are efficient in a way that allow people to compete, but also are not cost prohibitive. And the fair part matters. Last but not least is making sure that any candidate who wants to participate has an ability to do that, right? And so it's all deeply connected. If we have those as sort of the guideposts of this, I think there's a lot of different states that will certainly be able to qualify, and we'll have to decide whether it's going to be 4 states, 5 states like we had the last time, if it's going to be more, if there's going to be a complete restructuring of it, going to a new sort of model. There's all sorts of different ideas about how to approach this, and what will happen is a very fulsome conversation by the Rules and Bylaws Committee. Once we get through that process, probably by likely the winter of 2027, we will actually start, releasing that, codifying that, and then having the states put together their national delegates selection plans.
When you talk about states that could make sure our nominees are battle tested,
yep.
Does that speak to the importance of either states that will ultimately be swing states in the general, or at least states with primary electorates that look more like a general electorate?
Yeah, I mean, those are parts of the conversation, right? And it's a conversation we had on the Rules and Bylaws Committee last time around, right? Do you want states in there that are going to be general election targets, right? So you get a bang for your buck. You're competing early there, but it helps put you in a position to win a swing state down the road. Michigan's a good example of a state that moved into the window for that reason, right? But there's also an equal argument to be made about making sure that we are, reaching out to historic parts of our coalition and making sure that our candidates are getting in front of those constituencies. And so, South Carolina, of course, was moved to the front of the line because of the fact that the number of African Americans they have in their electorate, and rural African Americans, and it's a state that certainly can make a case if, in fact, we want to make sure that our candidates are battle tested in front of the African American community. So it's, as you can see from the calendar that was put forward last time around, there was probably equal consideration given to both. And it's hard to say where this committee is going to go. What I would say at the end of the day, we're going to have a large primary field, likely. And it's really important that we have a calendar that makes sure that we win in November. It's all connected, and so these will be conversations the committee has. I'll have an opinion on it, of course, as well. But I said this when I campaigned, and I think it's important that the chair of the party needs to not put their thumb on the scale on this decision either, that the committee and other thoughtful partners have to be part of this conversation. It's a tricky one, right? It's a lot of states who have tradition here, who get their nose out of joint if they're not in that early state process. And we have to figure this out. It's a really tough needle to thread here. So.
Well, before we get to 2028, we got the midterms. Gavin Newsom was here a few weeks ago, made some news laying out his various options that he's considering to fight back against the Texas attempt to gerrymander. Other Democrats in other states have since made some noise that they might too. What, in your view, is realistic to achieve here from our side? And do you think Democrats will be able to neutralize whatever Republicans end up doing?
Well, look, I mean, we have to fight back. I mean, what we're seeing is just a craven power grab directed by Donald Trump in the White House to steal power in a mid-cycle redistricting, right? The Constitution is very clear on this, by the way. It says that you have a decennial census and you draw the lines after that. It does not give states the power to do what just happened in Texas. They released their map today. I would say it's in many of the districts that they drew down there are violations of the Voting Rights Act. There'll be a lot of litigation on this for sure, and the DNC will be leading the way. But, I'm not going to presume what the decisions will be of Democratic governors, but Texas wants a showdown. We're going to give them a showdown, and we're not going to just roll over on this, right? I'm proud of Governor Newsom, certainly Governor Hochul. I know Governor Pritzker and Governor Moore are also looking at this. I think Democratic governors, this is not the time, John. Let me be really honest with you. This is a problem sometimes for Democrats, right? We throw a punch and then we pull it back because we're worried about the fallout. We throw a punch, we pull it back because we're worried about pissing someone off, right? We have to play fire with fire right now. And we can't worry about the consequence down the road. I know it sounds bad, but the reality is right now they are trying to steal power because they know they're going to lose this election if they don't rig the system once again. And that's what they're trying to do. And we can't allow them to do that. And I think every Democratic governor who's standing up right now is in the right to do whatever they can to send a message that we're not going to tolerate this type of behavior. So who knows if it will be successful, but we have to fight. And I certainly hope it will be successful. This type of behavior is unconstitutional. It's unacceptable. It is, again, what they did in Texas, just releasing this map. It's the first time now that Texas does not have a majority Latino district in the state. Think about that. They are disenfranchising minority voters, minority voting power. They are doing it to steal seats in a state that I will say is trending our way. We've got opportunities in Texas, of course, and what are they doing? They're rigging the system again. Look, Republicans again. We shouldn't be the only ones sometimes that play by the rules.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean we have to cheat. Doesn't mean we have to lie or steal or do any of that bullshit that they do, John. But why are we always the one that, in the party that are playing by the rules?
Yeah.
And again, I just want to be clear. There's things we're not going to do because we still have morals. We still believe in the Constitution. We still believe in the rule of law, right? I'm not saying we sink to their level. But we absolutely can't tie one of our hands behind our backs. And so whatever the Democratic governors decide to do, I'm going to be fully supportive of that.
Last question. What work have you been doing since you got to the DNC that you're really excited about, think's going to make a big impact, but isn't getting enough attention?
I think our organizing program that we've launched, our summer organizing program, because it's really the first down payment on our permanent campaign and our year-round organizing. It's a critical piece of the platform I ran on, which is we have to get out of, as I mentioned earlier, the idea that we just campaign in an election year. We have to be organizing all the time. And so, but to your point earlier about these traditional ways in which we've done our field programs, that script has to be thrown out the window. So when we think about organizing, you were talking about the digital spaces, let me talk about even the sort of in-person spaces. We can't just narrowly target a few voters on the doors and then leave everyone out of the conversation. There are pilots being done right now by the DNC and then other outside groups to actually take a precinct or take a county or take a Senate district and knock every single door. Right? Talk to every single voter, as an example. And so this organizing program is piloting some of that in terms of how and who we're talking to. The other piece of this is not just knocking on doors, making sure we're at festivals and picnics and union halls, making sure we're at concerts and other spaces that people are gathered in, making sure, as I said earlier, that you're ubiquitous in person and in digital spaces. And then the other piece of that organizing effort effort that I'm really proud of is that online organizing work that we're doing. It's the new sort of frontier of organizing. We've talked about this for some time. You guys probably even talked about it back in the Obama campaign, but the reality is now the technology has allowed us to do that organizing in a much more sophisticated way, in a way that allows us to really truly organize people one by one. That wasn't really present over the past decade or so. Now technology allows us to do a lot more in terms of how we organize, both in person and in those digital spaces, and that's what we're doing right now with this summer organizing program. It's not getting a lot of attention because, frankly, I'll be honest, there's a lot
going on.
Well, there's a lot that is going on in this country right now that's getting attention that probably deserves the attention, right? And that's where people's focus. No one, is tracking what the hell the Democratic Party is doing on a day-in-day basis, right? What they want to know is, are we planning to win, and how are we going to do it? Our donors and others. I've been buoyed by the response of what we've seen around the country, but I'm really excited about this organizing program. At the core of it, you haven't known me long, John, but at the core of it, who I am as an organizer. And I am a relentless sort of tactician. There's parts of this job I'm not good at, for sure, but I can tell you the things I'm good at. And what I'm really good at is winning elections. I didn't lose for a reason, and that's what I'm going to stay focused on.
Chairman Ken Martin, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Good talking to you.
Appreciate it.